Hi there. You're listening to the Practical Stoic Podcast with your host, me, Simon Drew. If you'd like to listen to over 200 episodes that were recorded before 2020, then you can head to my Patreon site. It's patreon.com/Simon J.E. Drew. We'd love to have you there, and any support is greatly appreciated. We'd love to also have you on our Facebook community, the Practical Stoic Mastermind. But for now, enjoy the show. Hi there, my name's Simon Drew, and welcome to the Practical Stoic Podcast. Now, today's guest was recommended to me by Kai Whiting, and Kai never gets a recommendation wrong. He's always given me the best recommendations, whether it's his advice or people he thinks should be on the show. And so I was very excited to have this guest on the show, none other than Piotr Stankiewicz. Now, I'm probably absolutely butchering the name pronunciation, but he does go by Peter as well. Now, Peter, we just had such a wonderful conversation talking about some of the elements of Stoicism that we agree on, some of the elements that we disagree on, talking about some of the elements of Stoicism that really are less defined. And it was just such a refreshing conversation. So mutually beneficial is the word I would use. And so very excited for you guys to listen to this. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about him before we jump into the episode. And just so you know, you've got all of the links to where you can find his books and everything that he does online in the show notes as well. So Piotr Stankiewicz is a philosopher and author, and also a promoter of Reformed Stoicism. He's the author of Does Happiness Write Blank Pages? On Happiness and Artistic Creativity, a manual for Reformed Stoicism, and other books. He writes in English and Polish, and he is a member of the Modern Stoicism team. And as I may have mentioned, he's based in Warsaw, Poland. So Peter was such a wonderful guest. I'm excited for you to listen to this. So without any further ado, I present to you Piotr Stankiewicz. Peter, I'm so glad to have you on the show. You came at high recommendation from one of my previous guests, Kai Whiting. And, I always love talking with Kai, so I imagine we're going to have just as good a conversation if he's recommending you so much. But I want to give you a little bit of an opportunity, seeing as you've never been on the podcast, to introduce yourself and maybe tell my audience a little bit more about what you're up to.
So, thanks for having me. That's a very fine occasion to talk to you. Thanks for that. And yeah, Kai is absolutely a great guy. We met in London, I believe, like 2 years ago, and or 1.5 years ago during the StoicCon 2018, I guess. So about me, StoicCon already, the modern Stoicism movement. The idea is that which obviously you do know, I guess. And obviously your audience also knows, is that there is this thinking around that in the 21st century, in the 20s already, actually the year 2020 and so on, we can use the ancient philosophy of the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, and so on and so on and so on. And there is this entire movement called Modern Stoicism. There is the new Stoa online. There are many ideas. Many books are being published about that. So I published my own, right? So my own take on Stoicism. I call it, and this book has been just released February, early March 2020. Yes, and the book is called Manual of Reformed Stoicism. And the idea is that basically we, in order to use the Stoic philosophy today, we need to reform it. We need to adjust. We need to interpret it properly so that it fits the modern times, our sensibility, and so on and so on and so on. So that's basically the idea for the that's for the idea for myself. What can I say? I live in the Warsaw area, Poland, and I'm a philosopher and author, writing books in English and Polish about Stoicism and about other things too. So awesome. So shoot me with questions.
I love it. Thanks so much for sharing that. And I guess the first thing that I'd probably start, this might be a good place to start the conversation, is to ask you, seeing as you've written, this manual of reformed Stoicism, and
Yes.
and you obviously think that we need to bring it into a modern time, which I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with. What do you think that the Stoics got right, and what do you think that they might have got wrong, or not necessarily wrong, but
Oh boy,
in a different
that's a
context?
serious
Like,
question to be.
I know there's a
That,
lot to go through, but maybe if you picked one or two things from each side.
that's a bomb. That's a huge question. So I don't really think that in my take. I mean, I don't really see that the ancient Stoics did something, got something wrong. It's not about kind of right or wrong, because basically I do believe in the general message or the attitude they suggest we might want to assume in our life in order to deal with life properly. I do believe that we need to kind of express that same message and the same attitude in the modern language, in the modern conceptual framework, so to speak, and that we need to, we need to factor in everything that happened during the last 2 millennia in philosophy, science, but also in politics and social stuff, and so on and so on and so on. It's just we blindside ourselves if we don't see that that things have changed, and that we need to put a bit of a new angle. So that's the idea about this reformation, not pointing out that certain things were wrong, but kind of trying to translate that into our modern way of thinking. And about the things they, as you said, they got right. So I wrote 2 books on Stoicism in English alone. So I do believe they've gotten a lot of things right. But one thing that's and this is how I begin my book. One thing I believe is kind of timelessly correct and universally applicable, and this kind of a great message of Stoicism that is and has been and always will be valid and relevant, is obviously the something that you obviously know. I mean, the idea that things are divided into things that we do control and things that we do not control. So this is something I believe, this is a very fine example of something that hasn't changed, that this idea is so logically so simple, so powerful, so kind of pristine, that we just have it, and this one doesn't change at all. I love it. That's for one. And I think I assume that both you and the audience knows that the basics, right? I mean,
of course. I'm always happy to delve a little bit deeper into the basics, just because it's interesting to see different people's interpretations, right? Because obviously, everybody who reads the Stoics gets something different out of them that's really important to them. And I actually, had a chance to read, the first few bits of your new book.
Yes, it's available online. Yes, that's true.
Yeah, and you started off with this statement, which I think is another one of those things that is, almost irrefutably true, like this ancient truth that we've understood for so long, which is, you said that the world we live in is not a world of facts, things, and events, but a world of our narratives about facts, things, and events, which I think is incredibly true. I mean, even right back down to our language, it's like, the words that we use are our way of bringing into being some sort of interpretation of the world around us, right? Like some sort of narrative about the world. And can you speak to how important that is for people to realize that and how you even can rationalize, how you can get to that understanding when everything seems so real, like everything that is in our lives seems so factual and real, what we're experiencing.
Does it seem so? Okay, so first of all, I will speak to you, saying that I already like this interview, because this is again a very fine question, kind of developing the conversation here, because what you're asking is actually, I think, a very good example to discuss what we had earlier. That is the concept of how the kind of angle or take on certain Stoic ideas should be changed or amended today in order to make it more contemporary, more modern. And this is a perfect example, because we do not, the world we live in is made of not facts themselves, but our narratives about those facts. And this is something that kind of sounds fresh, I believe, and sounds 21st century. But this is actually a translation or reinterpretation of what Marcus Aurelius was saying about impressions or conceptions, depending on the translation, right? This is one of the basic Stoic dogmas, and this is a very perfect example here, that the facts and events and occurrences and so on, so on, so on, they do not make us happy or unhappy, obviously. It is and Marcus Aurelius says, conceptions, impressions about them that make us happy or unhappy, and so on and so on. And our conceptions, impressions, etc., are under our control, and we need to control them in order to be happy, and so on and so on. That's clear, I guess. Now the thing is that conceiving this book, I was thinking about the proper term to express just that, and I believe that's exactly the case. That it is the term narrative that is the best contemporary equivalent of what Marcus Aurelius meant by impression or conception, and so on and so on and so on. This is basically the same thing, and is also good because it's connected to the realm of public discourse, politics, and so on and so on. So basically, this ancient Stoic truth holds, but needs to be expressed in a new language. That is, that it is our narratives that make us happy and or unhappy. So yeah, this is a very fine example, I believe, of this translation.
Yeah, definitely. And something that I really have been thinking about lately with this idea of these narratives, as you say, it's like, when you think of somebody who is overly emotional, overly reactionary to the life around them, you could almost describe that person as somebody who is more inclined to believe the stories that their mind tells them, right? So like they're walking around and all of a sudden somebody says something and their mind makes up this incredible narrative that what they have just said means this, and that means that I am hurt. And because I am hurt, I now react in an emotional way, right? Now, what I'm interested in is, for somebody out there, if somebody's listening to this podcast, they're probably already at the stage where they're willing to accept that I am trying to better myself, I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to change the narratives that I tell myself. And so they can already understand this idea.
Yes.
But to somebody who we would call an overly emotional person, somebody who is so engrossed in the stories that they tell themselves, what's the way out for them? Like, how do you get them to that point where they can understand? Like, how do you rationalize to a person like that, listen, you've got to understand that you're believing these stories and you don't have to believe certain stories?
I think that's... I think we may say at this point that some people just don't want to get there. I mean, certain people are, as you said, overly emotional or kind of caught up in their own stories, and they just Stoicism doesn't appeal to them. So that's and that's another kind of calibration or transformation or reinterpretation between Reformed Stoicism today and ancient Stoicism. That I don't think that Stoicism is kind of one size fits all answer for everyone. There are, I believe, certain people who will simply not accept Stoicism because it doesn't, it doesn't suit, it doesn't fit in their mindset, in their way of being, and they will go about their lives their way, and they will be maybe not happy, but they'll try to flourish on some different path. So, and I think that in the 21st century, again, we as Stoics, we shouldn't impose on everyone the Stoic dogmas. I mean, certain people will obviously disagree with them, and will just go about their lives. So that's one thing to say. I think that we need to accept and agree that Stoicism is not for everyone, that it requires certain willingness to take on this message. So that's one thing. But if someone wants to, and majority of folks, I guess, will benefit from Stoicism. Basically, I did benefit myself greatly, of course. I think the key message here is to kind of identify what those narratives are, because when we use the word narrative, we kind of open ourselves to the to this thinking that, you know, there's this kind of voice in our head. And I don't mean like psychological problems and, you know, hearing voices, that kind of stuff, but there is this kind of a voice that is with us all the time. I mean, from the time we wake up in the morning till we go to bed, that kind of narrates everything, interprets everything, kind of puts an angle on everything that happens. And this is basically it. This is this kind of stream, not stream of consciousness, but stream of thoughts, stream of narratives that makes up this kind of voice in the head. And the big thing is to kind of identify that, and then realize that we are not, that we are something else than that voice, right? That there is a kind of a, that there is a gap between myself, whatever that is, and this voice, this narrative, that I do not have to rely on it all the time, that I don't have to trust it all the time, that I can disobey this voice, that I can try to control it. So this is the first thing. I believe the realization that I'm not subdued, that I'm not inferior to that voice, that I can try to control it. That's the first step, and I believe it all goes from there.
Yeah, no, I think that listening to you answer that question has really actually kind of cleared my own vision of what it actually means, right? So firstly, I mean, I was even thinking as you were describing how, you know, we just got to accept that some people aren't going to like this philosophy. They're not going to align with it. You know, it kind of brings me to the idea of aligning with nature and understanding that there's a necessity for everything within this cosmos, right? Like, so there's always going to be people who absolutely just get it. There's always going to be people who don't, you know, like it's kind of like, we don't have to impose these ideas on people. We just have to accept and understand that this is, you know, you can't force somebody to see something that you see. They have to come to that decision on their own. And also, you know, you kind of mentioned that, you know, you have to first understand that it is a narrative, and that might be the key, right? So for somebody out there, if you can't get to that point where you agree and understand and see that you are living out a narrative every single day of your life, then you're not going to see the benefits of changing that. And is that almost, it seems almost like, you know, the superpower given to us by Stoicism, right? It's like, no matter what happens to you, you can change your narrative to make it work for you. That's kind of the idea of aligning with fate, right? Like, or like loving your fate.
Sometimes it might be difficult or even very difficult, but that's basically the message, that we depend on our narratives, not on the facts. So that's the thing here. About what you said earlier, the thing is that I mean, we in the modern time, in Reform Stoicism, and in today in general, we need to accept that people are far more you know, diverse than what the ancient Stoics tended to think, right? I mean, in my view, they were kind of pushing a more universal, as I said, one size fits all kind of answer. That everyone needs to take on these rules and everyone will be happier with them, and that there will be no conflict at any point. I believe that's something we can't coherently believe in today. I mean, that's one of the premises here. And what you said about the narratives, I believe that's a fine criterion here, right? That if someone is not trying to, that this kind of tells a Stoic or aspiring Stoic from someone who is not an aspiring Stoic at all, that we need to try to you know, negotiate and navigate with the narratives we have. If someone is not willing to do that, they will not follow the Stoic way. That's basically the point of divergence here.
And you used the word negotiate. That's exactly the word that I've used with you know, even with my coaching clients and stuff. It's like, something will happen to you and you will immediately come up with a story in your mind about exactly what that means. At the start,
this is the perfect description. If something happens, then
Hmm.
1/4 of a second passes, and then
Yeah.
you are ready with a story in your head. And the whole
Yeah.
point is that we need to, as you sure know,
Hmm.
we need to kind of invest in this gap between fact and the story, and from
Yeah.
there everything takes on.
Yeah, and a lot of people think that it's going to be a quick process, but I have found for myself at least that
Mm-hmm.
the process is less of an immediate gratification. It's more of a long-term negotiation with those
Yes.
stories. Coming back to that word, it's like at the start, it might be really hard for you to change that story, as it is for many people, because you've lived with that story your whole life, right? So you can't just expect it to
Yes,
immediately go
which is
away.
what psychotherapy teaches us, that it takes years to change.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So over time, you might say, okay, I'm willing to give you, maybe we'll go 50-50 here. I'll believe you halfway. And then the other halfway, I will try and change my reaction to this story. And then maybe next time the story only takes up 40%, and then 30%, and then 10%, until you're
Yes,
able
and
to more
then you
clearly.
sleep, and then you slip back to to zero, to 100%, and you have to start all over. I
Yeah.
believe that what we are talking about right now is another way to fairly characterize the way of Reform Stoicism. That is, the that we accept that it is a process. It is not, I mean, there is this element of epiphany, for example, when we realize that division into things in our power and not in our power, when we realize that we live by narratives and the stories and not by facts themselves. There is this kind of moment of epiphany, yes, but basically is just the beginnings. The process is much harder and much longer. And it's not true, I think, that once you, and this is again something that the ancients might have believed in, at least on some reading, that once you get there, once you become a Stoic, then you will be a Stoic for the rest of your life. I do not think that way. The risk of of falling down, and the risk of failure is always there, and then you start the whole process all over, because it's all about the stories. It's how we are used to think about ourselves, how we are used to tell this story that goes on and on in our head. So we can change that, but it is difficult. It's a habit we need to change.
Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. And I think that really Stoicism goes a long way to helping us to do that. And so,
Yes.
I'd like to go a little bit deeper into your kind of your view that it isn't for everyone.
Yes.
What makes it not for everyone? Like, and I don't mean, obviously I understand that not everybody's going to immediately grasp it, but what
Yes.
makes it not so, so I would see it as something personally that could be extremely helpful to anyone who is willing to allow it into their worldview, right? But what would make it not great for somebody? I don't
And
know
what
if
do
I
you
phrased that
think,
correctly. Yeah.
if I can turn the table for just a second, what do you think about that?
Okay. So I could definitely see, for example, that for some people, based on their life experience and their current worldviews, if they were to mix Stoicism with that, it could actually lead to a certain complacency, a
Hmm.
certain acceptance of a very bad lot in life, even though
Hmm.
they
Yeah.
have the ability to change it. There's certain
Yes.
situations where if you
The
mix
problem of
Stoicism with a
passivity. Yes.
worldview and a current existence, right, you might
Hmm.
lead down a negative path. But if you
Exactly. Yes.
understand Stoicism on the level that maybe you understand it right, surely,
Hopefully. Yes.
yeah, that's it. There's always that hope. But if you move past that, if you get to the stage where somebody has accepted that there are some ancient truths here that play a role in our lives, and they're able to see the value in these exercises, I'm not, and I'm completely open to being proved wrong. Like, like what would make it not valuable for somebody?
So yeah, what you said is something I fully agree with. That is that, and I already wrote about it, and I call it the conservative misinterpretation of Stoicism. That if we read it wrong on some level, it can lead to a kind of superficial conclusion that Stoicism is about just sitting down, doing nothing, and just basically accepting what is happening in this kind of passive, failed way. And I argue in both my books that this is obviously the wrong reading of Stoicism, and we shouldn't go down that avenue, because Stoicism is much more active philosophy of action, of living an active life, and so on and so on and so on. So that's one possible misunderstanding. Now, getting back to your original question, which is very, very fair. Obviously, my answer is that certain artists might be folks who are not interested in Stoicism. What I mean is that in general, there will be people who might want to pursue, generally speaking, other things than happiness in our life, right? One of the absolutely key premises of Stoicism is that we are seeking happiness. The goal of it all is to find a better way to live to live a better, more fulfilled, more satisfying, happier, eudaimonia, full of eudaimonia life, and so on, however we want to call that. This is the direction of Stoicism. This is all about that. But the thing is that there are certain people who will prefer to seek other things in life. For example, creative fulfillment, creating something, a work of art, something which is valuable in not the Stoic way, but the artistic way. And this is my favorite example, of course, because I wrote an entire book on that. Is there a paradox? Is there a problem between the Stoic ideal and the creative ideal on the other hand? And as we all know from the history of art and literature, there are many authors and many artists who kind of lived lives that had nothing to do with what we think about in Stoicism, right? And that's the problem. That's just on some level. Some say it is a stereotype, but on some level it is not. It is a deep decision that we, for example, being an artist, I want to create. That's the first, final and foremost vocation in my life, and I go with that. And if that brings me misery or happiness, I just embrace that, and this is a perfectly legit way to go, and this kind of culturally praised. We know those great artists and so on and so on, but it is something different than Stoicism. So that's one way to answer that some people just don't really want happiness, and for example, those may be artists.
Yeah. And I guess my only question for that, as reasonable as I think that is, wouldn't you see a pursuit of a creative outlet? And this comes from I'm a musician myself, and so
so that's perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Then you understand me. Then you understand what I'm saying. I assume that's hands down.
Yeah, of course. And so I understand that there's you want to reach a creative pursuit, but the creation of that creative pursuit brings me a lot of meaning in my life, right? It brings me a certain amount of happiness that is simply a byproduct of being a more effective human being, right?
But is it still Stoicism?
Well, that's my question.
Yes.
See, yeah. I see. I'm not too sure if I'm trying to understand whether Stoicism is a framework for thinking effectively more than it is a I know it's a way of life, but I think it's also a framework for becoming an effective human being at whatever you do. And that's why we see so many people doing so many different things.
I agree 100%.
But yeah.
Yes. Yes, it is a way to. I totally agree with all the phrases. A way of being a more efficient human being, a more effective person, to be happier, to think more, to think in a better way. This kind of the way of thinking and way of doing things, the principles of thought and conduct. These are all the phrases I believe you can find in my book. Some of them verbatim. So yeah, I totally agree with that. Now the real positively philosophical thing here is that whether or not happiness attained in a non-Stoic way, is it still Stoic happiness? which may
Yeah.
seem a little confusing, but I believe that's a point here. And my answer might be, I would lean to say no, in the sense that if an artist achieves creative fulfillment, produces something great, and it is socially praised, and so on and so on and so on, there is this feeling of fulfillment, some deep satisfaction, however you want to call that, but it is something different, I believe, than at least in many cases different than what we are trying to pursue in Stoicism, and hence this kind of a tension between artists and the Stoics, right? The fulfillment of the creative process and the fame that may come from our artistic pursuits, it's something different than the Stoic stuff, I believe. Although, so that's one way to think about that. But although, on the other hand, there would be, this refers, I believe, to only to some artists. There are many other guys who will be perfectly happy with Stoicism, who will find Stoicism helping their creative endeavors. And obviously, which happens all the time, if your work goes unrecognized and no one listens to your music, no one reads your books, and so on and so on, Stoicism will obviously help with that. By it's not about it's not in our control, and so on and so on. So this is the story here, I believe.
Yeah, and this is such an interesting discussion for me, because I think now that I think about it, I agree that there's a different type of happiness, right? So if you're an artist who seeks that kind of that praise from society for your work, every artist goes into their own creations hoping that maybe one day it will be recognized by someone, right, as beautiful.
Yes, I will mildly agree. Yes,
but you might also make the argument that some of the greatest artists in any field of culture within our societies are those artists who may have had a very Stoic approach to it, in that it was all about the process for them, not about the end. It was about, they didn't give a damn what anybody thought about their art, because their art was only an expression of themselves and not an expression of anything that they wanted society to appreciate, right? So that's why art pushes the boundaries, right? Because it's like, I don't care what you think. Yeah.
So this is, just for the record, this is exactly what I'm discussing in my, among other things, in my previous book, Does Happiness Write Blank Pages? The title, I believe, speaks for itself. And this is exactly that. On this level, Stoicism may help a lot. That in artistic activity, in creative activity in general, there is something, or there should be, at least I believe there should be, this element of focusing on what you are trying to do and not what other people will or do say about that. And this converges nicely with Stoicism. And obviously there would be certain there is a parallel here, obviously. But on a different level, the artist is focusing on the creative person is focusing on trying to create something, some external thing. It may be a good podcast, it may be a piece of music, a book, whatever. And this is not, I think, exactly what the Stoics mean. I mean, they urge us to focus on, in a way, on ourselves, on working up our own narratives. To use a metaphor, I may say, I guess we may say that for the Stoics, we ourselves are the best work of art for ourselves. I mean, it is, as a Stoic, it is my goal to focus on turning myself into a piece of a piece of art, right? That my goal, my creative goal, is to create a good life for myself and by myself, and in a way through myself, and that I should focus on doing this, and not on drawing paintings, producing music, or writing books. So that would be a difference here. And I believe that the ancient Stoics had this kind of disdain towards art, literature, and poetry, and I believe it roots from here exactly.
No, Dan, this is such an interesting discussion. I'm loving this, Peter, because, I've been thinking about that a lot lately as well. It's like, one of the reasons I don't want to draw I don't want to draw a massive connection between something like Christianity and Stoicism, right? Because they're completely different things. Like one requires you to believe in something that might not necessarily be completely provable. The other is a
Mhm.
philosophy where we talk about ideas, right? And so, but the connection that I would draw in this circumstance is, you might argue that one of the reasons why religions have been so good at taking such a common place within our societies is because of their embracing of culture, right? Their embracing of arts and music and like
Okay, well, that's a
they
good point. Okay, okay.
there's like a real importance there for bringing music, because music is, uh, to me, even music and art is nothing but a representation of the beauty of the world that we live in, right? All music and art it's you might call it a direct image of nature, right? It
Hmm.
mimics the sounds that we hear in nature, and has always done that since we're playing drums and all sorts of things.
Hmm.
And so, as a musician, I try to think of the ways that I can incorporate more art and culture into the canon of Stoicism.
So there's a lot to unpack in what you just
Yeah.
said. Starting from the bottom line, I, the in the previous book, in Does Happiness Write Blank Pages on Stoicism and Artistic Creativity, my headline there is not that an artist and a Stoic are two necessarily different folks.
Oh yeah, and
What I argue,
I don't want you to think that I'm just arguing.
yeah, absolutely. What I'm saying is that in that book I analyze a number of ways of thinking about art, kind of motifs, kind of themes of artistic creativity, and some of them uh, can diverge. It can work well with Stoicism, and some of them cannot. For example, if your only goal in your creative pursuit is to become famous, then clearly it's a non-Stoic thing, right? But what you just said, to try to not express, try to convey the beauty of the natural world, to kind of imitate the beauty of things, of natural things in your music, poetry, or whatever. That would be a Stoic thing. I think, yeah, that we may agree here, right?
Mm.
That with the, now not in the Reformed Stoicism, but in ancient Stoicism, there's obviously this was this clear thinking that the world is a great place and everything is beautiful, kind of well arranged, and so well tuned in, and so on and so on and so on. And if you, particularly by music, if you try to kind of tune into that and express that, then that's a Stoic thing. So this approach to artistic creativity can work well with Stoicism. So I agree here.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's a fair point to be made, that there are kind of different aspects here. So that would be one thing. For the other, I can tell you this, just as a quick detour. Yesterday, there was I got an email that for I believe 5 or 6 weeks, all the classes I have at University of Warsaw, I mean all classes entirely, will be cancelled for over a month here at University of Warsaw. So I won't see my students of in philosophy of religion course for some time till mid-April. But when we're back in class, I will totally bring up to them that point, because this is something I teach a course of philosophy and religion, and this is something we didn't really touch so far. That the good point you made here, that the kind of power of religion, the popularity, the thing that religion is with us since time immemorial, and it isn't going anywhere, definitely anytime soon. Uh, it is kind of propelled by the fact that religion, at least Christianity, kind of embraces various aspects of cultural life, right? That religions maybe paradoxically are somehow open to earthly life and their various aspects like culture, like art, and so on and so on and so on. At least they used to be, and that's a good factor here. And yes, and here there would be this kind of a non-obvious difference between Stoicism and the religion, Christianity, to put it plainly. That Stoicism is much more, in a way, focused on itself, in a way, while Christianity, is much more multifaceted and has these connections with arts and other things. Stoicism is much more self-contained, and that would be a fair point here.
And I actually I love what you said about going back to the idea of like you being the art piece, right? Like you're the artwork and the world that we live in.
Yeah.
And for me, honestly, lately I've been really finding so many things just exquisitely beautiful, right? Because I'm learning more about the Stoic idea of aligning with nature, and I really think that it's a call to kind of come home, right? And understand that, look, all of this, it's beautiful, but look at Marcus Aurelius looking at a loaf of bread and saying, how exquisite is it that this bread is just cracking in these certain formations at the top, and just finding just the natural parts of the world that we live in so beautiful and seeing them as an art piece, right? Or listening to nature and experiencing how incredible that is, or experiencing how beautiful it is to become the very best person that you can be. Like that is an expression of the kind of divinity, you might say, that the Stoics talked about in the cosmos, right? Like
Yes.
it's really so. How do you view the idea of aligning with nature? What is your perspective on that?
So yes, so finally the time has come to say something controversial, because I don't really believe in aligning ourselves with nature, and let me explain that. Obviously, as you know, as and the audience probably knows already, this is one of the key Stoic, I don't know, dogmas, or even something more than dogma, that we need to live consistently with nature, conformably to nature. We need to follow nature, and so on and so on and so on. The problem with that, and this is kind of a banner thing for Stoicism, one defining characteristic, as it is usually conveying. The problem here, and this is probably one of the biggest differences between my own approach, between Reformed Stoicism and Ancient Stoicism, is that I don't really believe in following nature. In the sense, I'm not saying that, just to be precise, I'm not saying that the ancient Stoics were wrong, just to use your phrase, in their idea of following nature. It made sense. That would be a good line. Following nature might have made sense in antiquity, but today it's kind of very confusing, because we don't really, if you want to write a book exposing kind of elaborating on Stoicism, what it is, and explaining that to laymen, to people who haven't been exposed so far, if you start with you have to follow nature, you immediately run into problems, because you don't really know what you're talking about. If you read Marcus Aurelius, the idea of nature and following nature was kind of obvious, self-evident to him. He never actually, in a way, he never explains what it means to follow nature, at least not in the sense I have in mind. Today, we have so many possible understandings of what nature means. We have science, which completely changes the outlook on the natural world and on the purpose of the natural world. That is kind of just to say what to follow nature means, in a way, everything and nothing. And that's the problem. You are already, you have the beautiful leaves and the beautiful, I don't know what that is, the flower, Australian flowers, perpetual summer down there. You have, so, and you were saying about the beauty of the natural world, using the adjective natural of, flowers, trees, nature, when you, go out and appreciate the, all that it is, all what is out there in the biological environment here on Earth. And that's one way to go. But, there is nothing in the Marcus Aurelius that and in other Stoics that kind of proves that this was their line of thinking. We just as well may think the other way, that nature was, I don't know, being in agreement with facts, or being in agreement with God's will, and so on and so on and so on. So that's the basic problem today. The kind of conceptual landscape is much more complicated and much more kind of fine-grained than it used to be in antiquity. And we need to be much more specific. And if we want to be much more specific, we need to really not use the phrase follow nature, and we need to kind of focus on what it means. So in a way, officially, what I'm saying is that we need to, kind of abandon the idea of following nature. But on the other hand, my entire book is kind of, 400 pages. And the only thing it does, it explains in modern language what it means to follow nature today, right? So this is the entire thing, that we don't have, if you say follow nature, you'll kind of get stuck right in the beginning. The whole thing is about to explain what it means without really doing the recurse to the term nature. And this is a bit of a controversial thing, because vast majority of Stoics basically still repeats this phrase, follow nature. The problem is that it is a very complex thing to understand what we are talking about.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with you. Like when you started saying, that you don't necessarily think that it has a place anymore, I was slightly confused. But I think what you're saying is that it's a problem of definitions, right? Like I know for myself, for the first 2 years of doing this podcast, I didn't really touch on the idea of aligning with nature much at all, simply because I didn't understand it. And I didn't know where to go to understand it, right?
So basically, that's my point. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many different interpretations. You could say,
yes,
well, you appreciate the beauty of nature, but I really think that it comes down to aligning with things that cannot be otherwise. These just natural laws of the universe that we now know are just factual, right? And you have to deal with it. For example, if you wake up in the morning and it's raining outside, don't get angry at the fact that it's raining outside, because it cannot be otherwise, right?
Yeah, but I prefer, the thing here is that it's better to explain that through the things that are not within your power, right?
Yeah.
Because then you're providing a specific principle, specific kind of code for thinking that way. When you say that things cannot be otherwise, it's kind of, again, it's to the rain example. It's an umbrella idea which saves us from the rain down there, but it doesn't really explain anything. I mean, if I feel, if I get the coronavirus, then what does it mean that I need to follow nature? It doesn't mean that I can't go to the hospital and seek treatment because it is natural that I have to be sick. That's the problem here. That the concept of nature not only has many meanings today, but it also evolves. It used to mean, I mean, in the 19th century, it would mean something completely different than it means today, right? Both kind of, politically and from the, technological point of view. We are talking from Europe to Australia right now, and the connection is perfect, and it's kind of, the sharpness of the video and everything is completely great. And for a guy like back in the first half of 20th century, that would be a miracle. That would be against nature. That would be completely impossible. So is it consistent with nature that we even speak, or is it not? That's the problem. It changes and it evolves. I mean, back in the ancient times, the idea of having having glasses would be against nature. Just nature says that you need to get blind and your vision needs to be out of focus, and you shouldn't do anything about that. This is in the modern world, this approach is very problematic.
Yeah, I can definitely see how it can be like that, and I've experienced that in my own thoughts, about things, recently, thinking about the idea of aligning with nature. It's like, well, does it mean that you just accept things for what they are because that's what nature has done, or do you say, well, part of our nature as human beings is that we have rationality that allows us to think and create new
Rationality, yeah.
inventions that can help us. So, for
Mhm.
example, getting glasses isn't going against nature, because in our nature as human beings, some people are really good at coming up with solutions for our biggest
Yes,
problems, right?
reason. Yes,
And so
yes.
there's so many interpretations for it, and it can
Yeah.
become
So
very confusing.
if I were to pick, I would probably say that nature, that in a way science. I mean, modern science is a kind of an equivalent to is a one of the possible expressions of what nature meant in antiquity, and also that following reason, right? Because you cannot really follow science, right? I mean, if a doctor says you need to do this or that in order to avoid a coronavirus, then okay, I can follow that advice and follow science. But in our practical daily life, following science is kind of doesn't make sense. I mean, if I following science means what exactly? That I shouldn't, I don't know, that I shouldn't fly, or that I shouldn't what? I shouldn't that they shouldn't run at like 100 miles per hour, something like that. Following nature is, following nature translated into embracing science, that would be a good phrase, gives a proper framework. I do believe strongly that Stoicism today, Reformed Stoicism, is very much built upon science. That is, that science provides us the framework for the work we live in. If you believe that the moon landing was faked, or if you don't believe in a vaccine, or if you believe in connecting with Australia, if you believe in flat Earth or something like that, then it makes you not a Stoic. Basically, this is something I can agree with. Because as a Stoic, you need to embrace science, but it's not enough in the way that just embracing science doesn't really teach us much about how to live our daily life, right? Because science is not about practical, ethical decisions. It builds the landscape which I need to live with, and that's very fine. But I need something more. For instance, reason, and the other way to translate following nature is following reason, using the capability of rational, reasonable thinking. And this is exactly what I elaborate on in my book. On these 400 pages are basically developing the idea that we need to, how we are supposed to use our reason. But the short umbrella phrase, follow nature, follow reason, or follow facts, doesn't really explain much.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of value in what you're saying there, and I know a lot of people tend to really lean it. Like, obviously, everybody would agree that following science, like we should all lean unto the scientific understanding of the world, right?
Yes,
We need to
yes,
trust that there are people
mm-hmm.
out there who know far
Mm-hmm.
more than we do, that might actually teach us something about how the world works. But then what's so confusing to me is, you look at something that actually has kind of helped me to learn a few things about Stoicism is looking at ancient philosophies like Taoism and these Eastern philosophies, which had very, like, if you look at the ideas, they're so similar to the idea of aligning with nature. And I think aligning is maybe more of the correct term than maybe follow, because not necessarily
Aligning,
follow,
yeah.
it's like aligning.
Mm-hmm.
And in Taoism, they, one of the central tenets is, for example, not to force anything, and to maybe see that your own rationality could at times be your worst enemy, because it's the very thing that moves you towards desiring so much, right? And that maybe the only way that I can really conceptualize it is that maybe if we are a part of the whole, and maybe if every other creature on Earth simply just knows what to do biologically, maybe by quieting the mind and stepping outside of our own overthinking mind from time to time, we can align with a certain biological compass that could even explain things, for example, like intuition, or things that we just don't understand, but sometimes they just work. And this has been what's really interesting to me, just not necessarily claiming that these are facts, but looking at different philosophies and ancient truths that can teach us about even the natural world, right? And what it means to be a human. do you think that at times overthinking, over rationality can be our biggest enemy as much as our biggest friend?
Not over rationality, but
Overthinking,
overthink.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
yes, this is I believe this is basic. This is one way. This is the Stoic message that and that's why, getting back to the word narratives, that's why those narratives and this voice in our head can be so problematic, because mostly when our narratives, when the story in our head leads us astray, it's when when we kind of overthink or over confuse, when we put through our thoughts, we put more in the facts and events than actually is there, right? And these are, all the obvious examples. I go catch the bus, I miss the bus, and then I say, oh Jesus, it's always me, I can never get the bus, I'm a failure, and my life is one big failure, and that kind of stuff. And this happens, right? And this is basically this what I believe we agree here, that this is overthinking, over rationalizing, not a good word, but over creating too much interpretation and wrong interpretation to boot. In this sense, I agree 100%. And from my personal experience with trying to calibrate my mind stoically, this is basically 80% of the effort you put in, that you need to stop your mind of leading you astray. You need to kind of cut down these narratives, because you mostly over create problems. You see problems when they aren't there, and so on and so on. So here I would perfectly agree, and it's a story that is there. I mean, many people I think will feel the same way. That is most of the problem, and this is again something I believe that psychotherapy teaches us, that we put too much thought in this negative, over problematic way in things. So yeah, I agree with that. Now on embracing science and embracing the scientific attitude of sticking to what we know, I won't talk much about Eastern philosophy, because I'm not really an expert there. What I can tell you is that, yeah, exactly. And so and the problem there is that obviously, speaking about the very broad subject with many difficult ideas and concepts and terms, may be kind of confusing. But what I can tell you is that absolutely there are similarities between Stoicism, between Zen Buddhism, and on the other hand, mindfulness, for example, to use the Western counterpart. There are certain deep similarities, for example, in the approach to the narratives, the idea that I am something else than the stream of my thoughts, and so on and so on and so on. So there is some, I do believe, or at least I do observe, I see that there is this kind of a similarity in the message between various approaches, be it Stoic, be it Buddhist, being mindfulness, and so on and so on and so on. But to answer your question with specificity, I see that similarity mostly in the things we do control, things we do not control, in the idea that that the life is about narratives, not about the facts. Here, not about the relationship between me, myself, and the whole.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there, and yeah, obviously not being an expert on any of those Eastern philosophies as well, but it's always interesting to see the similarities between all of these different philosophies from around the world, and to try to conceptualize what that means, right? Like whether that even speaks to the what the Stoics talked about when they said the logos, right? This information source, whatever it is. It's very interesting to think about. But I really love that you said, you alluded to the idea that 80% of Stoicism could be just releasing that chatter, and
or at
I
least
think,
at least in my case.
yeah, well, I agree, because I really think that too many people focus so much on that element of control, and they forget about the part that really, like, so much of it is just releasing control of all of the things that you now know you don't control. Because if you think about it, you can control like 0.01% of the things that are
Yes.
available in life, right? And the rest of it is just not up to you. And so I think that's what's been really helpful for me as well. Speaking to what you're saying, it's like just releasing all of that. And there's such a similarity there with that idea of releasing what you can't control between so many different religions, so many different philosophies, which is, that's what I'm really interested in, these ancient truths, right? Do
Yeah.
you
So
think,
what? Uh-huh.
go on.
Yeah, you just ask a
I
question.
was going to say,
Go
do
ahead.
you think that there are any other kind of ideas within Stoicism that you could see as just universally true? It's just impossible to see any other way once you understand it.
Um, so just for the record, that it doesn't follow from the idea that something is universal. It doesn't follow that you cannot see it any other way. These are two different things, I believe. But yeah, there are many points like that. For example, the idea, I call it the idea of being prepared for the evil things that may happen. In my book, I call it anticipate mishap. And then in Latin it was called premeditatio malorum, that is to premeditate the bad malum, the bad thing. And this is exactly what modern psychology says about the so-called negative visualization, right? That that if you are anticipating something which might possibly go the wrong way, if you visualize it kind of in a colorful, precise way beforehand, then if it really happens, you will be maybe not relieved, but you will be prepared. And this is something absolutely coherent with what the Stoics had to say, and I do speak about that. I do discuss that in the book, and there is a 200% coherence between this and modern science and psychology. So that would be one thing, and I believe it works. I mean, it just works. If you may not want to use that, if you don't want, then you don't have to. But there is no denying that it just works. And this kind of certain amount of those mind hacks, we may say, are that the Stoics taught us. They are to be simply confirmed, and there is evidence in modern psychology, like negative visualization and other things. So yeah, there are many similarities like that, and I believe, the question about why. I mean, yeah, one may say that there is certain, on some level, that there is certain deep human nature which remains intact over time, and different times and different cultures just try to explore it, and that's why. But it's still the same, and that's why they come up with very similar answers. That's a bit conservative answer. Conservative approach. But yeah, those similarities are there definitely, and in a way, the similarities between ancient Stoicism and modern and Reformed Stoicism are one of are a fine example that we, despite two millennia passing, despite the passing of the 2 millennia, we are still able to connect with the same truths and the same attitudes to life. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's something to explore anyway. It's such a touchy subject because it can lead you down all sorts of rabbit holes. But yeah, like it's really interesting. I appreciate you sharing that. And honestly, like this has just been such a great conversation. And I just want to thank you again, Peter, for sharing all of your
Thank
insights
you.
and I just wanted to ask one more question of you.
Yeah.
So you actually spent a lot of time with Lawrence Becker, is that right?
How do you know that? From Kai, right?
Yeah, he did.
Yes. So Lawrence Becker was a friend and kind of a mentor to me. Yes, that's true. And I also was very, in my thinking about Stoicism, I was very heavily influenced by his book A New Stoicism from back in 1998, first published 1998. And yeah, that's a huge influence, huge impact here.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to ask, like, because I will admit fully, I haven't even read the book yet, but I've got so many people recommending it to me. I have to read it. I have to do it Because I know that it comes at high recommendation by pretty much everyone.
Becker's book.
Yeah, yeah. What was
I
the
mean,
biggest influence that you received from his way of thinking about Stoicism?
first of all, please remember, don't feel dispirited, but this is a difficult book. This is heavy-duty academic philosophy. It is very serious. It's not a popular handbook, popular
Yeah.
manifesto of Stoicism. It's a really, really hard philosophical book. What I got from Becker is basically a few points. First of all, that we need to the very idea that we need to reform, right? This is the motto to my book that's going to be out in May. That we need to. It is very curious to think what would Stoicism look like today if it had this 2,000 years continuous history. If it had the chance to react to to Newton, to Descartes, to Kant, Hegel, and so on, and to the advent of science, and so on and so on. So this idea that we need to, in a way, think up Stoicism again, try to express it today, kind of make up for the time lost. So this is one of the absolutely basic ideas, but also that there is the problem with nature, that following nature is a problematic concept, and we shouldn't simply repeat that without second thought, because it is a much more complicated thing today than used to be back then. And here I, in a way, go one step further than Becker, because what he says basically is that we need to understand consistency with nature is consistency with facts, which is true, but which is, I believe, true, but I believe that at this point we don't really need the term nature anymore. So we kind of need to take one more step. What he says about science, that science is in a way provider of the input data for our ethical and practical reasoning, and that again is an expression, is a present day expression of nature, of the ancient concept of nature. These would be, I believe, the things that I picked from him, and of course there is a great level of personal gratitude, because he also a very generous friend, trying to show me the ways how to do things, and how to on the practical level with the publishing industry and so on, how to do things and how to deal with them. So yeah, that's a really great. That was a really great guy, and just for the record, he died back in 2018 in November, I guess.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to kind of look back and see what you learned from him, and his kind of legacy
absolutely
lives on, right? Like, and that's what's so beautiful about this, and I appreciate that you're continuing that effort to reform Stoicism and bring it into a modern light, and try to really dig up these ideas, and I agree, it's been a long time, right? It's been a long time since it's had kind of a big resurgence. And so we kind of have a responsibility, seeing as there are so many ancient truths found in this philosophy, we have a responsibility to bring it into a modern context, right? And
yes, I believe so. Yeah. That would be a cliche phrase, but yeah, we can say that the Stoic legacy lives on, which on one hand it is a cliche, but on the other hand, do we really? I mean, Stoicism is having its momentum right now. I mean, it's everyone. I mean, some people are talking about Stoicism, and in a way, it is popular. Books are being published, and so on and so on. My books are not the only ones, of course, about Stoicism. There is a huge, there is a big, the entire cultural movement around that. But it's not really the thing with, like, I don't know, let's say. Let's say, I don't know, even Plato. I mean, Plato. I mean, no, there is the Plato, not Plato, but Prozac. Not Prozac, but Plato. But this is not the truth with other guys. Let's say Wittgenstein maybe, or Hegel. You don't really think about yourself as a Hegelian or Wittgensteinian, in the sense that you can think yourself as Stoic, right? No one really thinks that. If you are a follower of, say, St. Thomas Aquinas, okay, you may be a follower of him, but that means you just share philosophical views with him. and you believe in his truths. Only the Stoics, in a way, do live continually in the way that they intended in the first place, as a school of life, as a way of living life. If you are again a Hegelian or Wittgensteinian or whatever, it is only the intellectual approach. It's an intellectual decision. It's not a real life decision. And here in Stoicism, this legacy continues to live also in the practical, mundane, everyday realm, and this is a great thing. And that's why I believe we need to go on into the new millennium. So yeah, that's basically the thing.
I love it. Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I think you're spot on. There needs to be a preservation of these ideas and a respectful interpretation of these ideas within the modern context. And
preservation, but also reformation, reinterpretation, bringing it again to life, trying to live it in our own life, in our own cultural background, and so on and so on and so on. That's the basic message here. No, and I share this with many guys. Not only me, but also other authors. This is basically the idea behind the entire Stoic movement, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to thank you for continuing the work. I want to thank you for coming on the show, Peter. This was seriously such a beautiful conversation, and I want to have you back as many times as possible.
We may definitely execute that. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It was a good conversation. That's true.
All right, so there you have it, my interview with Piotr Stankiewicz. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. That was such a mutually beneficial conversation, and I'm so excited to have him back many, many more times. So make sure you head to his links, grab his books there as well, and also reach out to him and let him know how much you appreciated him being on the show. So I'll talk to you guys next time, but until then, I hope that this episode has helped you on your rise to the good life. Ciao. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Practical Stoic Podcast. If you'd like to stay up to date with the Practical Stoic community and everything to do with this podcast, then just go to my website, simonjedrew.com, and subscribe to the Practical Stoic Weekly, a newsletter that I send out every week with updates and all sorts of great Stoic insights. You can also find me everywhere online by searching Simon J. E. Drew. See you next time.